She Can, we tell women's stories. We show how women got to where they are today. And these are really authentic and vulnerable conversations so often. And I really would like to welcome Yehudis Goldsobel today. Yehudis, welcome to She Can. You're the policy officer at the Mayor's Office for Policing and Crime. You're the founder of the Sexual Abuse and Sexual Violence Awareness Week since 2014, and you ran your own charity for 10 years helping victims of child and sexual abuse within the Jewish community. Tell us a little bit more about yourself and what you do.
Thank you for having me. I've for the past 10, 12 years have worked heavily within the sexual violence sector. Like you said, supporting women, girls, but also men and boys who were sexually abused in the Jewish community in the UK. And founded the Awareness Week off the back of that, when I'd met so many brilliant people doing different work in the sector, and was shocked to learn that we didn't have any designated day or week in the UK to openly discuss these things. So I pulled people together, had a chat, and it's been really, really nice to see how it grows and the resources people and organizations are creating to add to the conversation. It's just, yeah, so that's like a lot of what I've done is very heavy sexual violence stuff. Currently work at the Mayor's Office for Policing and Crime as a policy officer, but not in the sexual violence realm, even though I still do sort of sessions and training on the side about sexual violence. So at the moment, it's a bit of a nice balance after being so heavily immersed in it for so long.
Yehudis, so tell us a bit more about your journey. How did it become your purpose? How did you invest a large part of your life in affecting change?
Well, personal experiences. Growing up in a very sheltered community with very little, if any, access to the outside world. I guess when I first learned about my own experiences being sexual abuse, I was shocked. And because I had not had, I guess you don't want to expose people and children to sexual abuse, but I had no exposure to the healthy side of sexual relationships, appropriate touch, boundaries. There was strict segregation growing up. So the minute that line was even crossed, it was already not okay. So to what extent was it really bad, or was I just experiencing it as really bad? So I guess for me, it was, you could see where the shift and change of life direction. And when I learned that my experiences with sexual abuse, and I was just about to turn 21. And I guess the course of my life changed then. As you process it, and I went to therapy and read an awful lot of books of other people's experiences, self-help books, the range. And I then signed up to go to university and learn psychology. And I guess over that course of those 3 years was, you could say, transformational. But when I disclosed more publicly, without going crazy public, my experiences, I had lots of other people share their experiences of sexual abuse from my community. And I reported the offender to the police, which is something you're not allowed to do in my community growing up. You need permission from a male rabbi to report to the police these sort of crimes. And so obviously that made its own news. And I knew then that something had to change in my community. And I naively thought it was a matter of education and just making leadership and organizations aware of their blind spot. I mean, it took me a long time to accept that it wasn't necessarily a blind spot, and that some organizations and some people in leadership roles choose to ignore it, even though they know it exists. So I guess you could say I battled on for 10 years, created an organization, supported hundreds of people, heard thousands of disclosures of every different type of sexual abuse you could think of, men, women, children. And I think for me, it's funny when you say the change, I feel like it wasn't enough. I never thought ever when I set up a charity that this would be my role forever. It was more, here's the gap, here's what needs to exist, because there is no support provision that is independent, that can give people information about reporting, about support, even health information with regards to sexual abuse was so hard to find. So I thought it would just be, set this up and it would fit somewhere in an existing system. And I don't know, I would do something else after. But it doesn't look like that's the way things pan out. Organizations from a grassroots level are often there for the long haul because they plug gaps that are gaping gaps in society structure that shouldn't be there, but people know are there and either don't have the resources or the motivation to plug those gaps. So I, maybe silly, thought this was a temporary sort of thing that it would then fit within a bigger system. And I guess that won't really happen. And I guess I really expected a lot more change to come of it, because to me, when you look at the level of safeguarding, like especially in this country, the bar is so exceptionally low. And so many organizations or anything evolving around children and young people don't even meet the bar. But then they think they are worthy of a medal when they do reach that bar. And I want to say, like, well done, but the bar in this country is so low, like, do more and you can be that example. We need to start shifting that ownership, that responsibility. We all have that responsibility for better safeguarding. I wish I would have seen more of a change in that regard, but who knows, maybe it will happen in my lifetime. So yeah, that's sort of when it comes to change. It's interesting that you said the word change. I always feel like it wasn't enough. I didn't see the progress that I would have hoped, that it was merely people ready to just sit around the table and say, well, we didn't see this, let's just do X, Y, and Z. And it's, better safeguarding, keeping loads of children safe. Why do we not want to do that? But yeah.
Well, Yehudis, first of all, I want to say thank you, because I think that every one of you who's had experiences that really are sign of things that really don't work in our society, and those gaping holes need to be filled, and each one of you stepping up, I think, is bringing about change, because the power of one, I always think, is really powerful. And just, you said a couple of hundred people. Well, that couple of hundred people is a snowball effect, because their children and children's children will not have to live with the same systemic issues, because they will have been made aware and they will have been educated. And so that will not perpetuate. And we know that many leaders all around the world perpetuate systems that don't work. And I think I've interviewed various women now who work in your same field, and they are all pushing the mountain, because it still is a mountain. And I think the good thing is that we are able to listen to each other. And I think the important thing is to tell the stories, because when survivors or victims and survivors come to the table with governing bodies and businesses and all the different stakeholders, then I think change is possible. I'm not saying it always happens the way that we imagine it, because of course it should be clear to everyone that this is what needs to happen, and there are people fighting and keep fighting for things to change, especially in the sexual abuse realm, because that is ongoing. And so often, I think something like over 80% of cases don't ever get to court. You know, they get reported, but there are so many loopholes in the process that there is no justice often to be seen for the victims. And so, thank you, first of all. I'm wondering, Yehudis, going forwards, now that you look back, you've been doing this, for a long time, you have brought about change. What is your main motivator going forwards? You've got that awareness week every year. What is your main motivator?
I guess it's more personal in that if I was to disclose again today, would the response and result be any different to what it was when I disclosed 15 years ago? I think that is literally it. That is the motivating drive behind everything. There are more people like me today.
Yeah.
There are still women and young girls who are silenced, who don't know, don't have the words to articulate, have no autonomy, agency. And I think it's not easy for me to forget that, but you can't ever forget that. It's part of who you are. We all remember our childhood. It's like the shortest period of our life compared to everything, hopefully, that we live, but it's also the most impactful.
Yeah.
And, I'll always know and live that feeling. And I know that there's other women and girls in my community, in other communities, who are going through exactly the same thing. So that is like the drive. I would love to see a better system. We have a very vast system that exists. Especially here, we have healthcare, we have statutory services on all different levels. Yes, it has been stripped back and it's lacking in resources and funding, but it shouldn't come down to somebody like myself creating something on a grassroots level. That's not to say grassroots doesn't need to exist. It's more to say the term in this country we like to throw around a lot is hard to reach communities. I disagree. We have all these systems. You need to make them accessible. People aren't hard to reach as much as you're not bending your system properly or creating it in a way that makes it accessible for people. So while you say we are an open for all service or anybody can come and access healthcare, how accessible is that? And that's really what everyone should be looking at. And I guess assessing, instead of saying, well, we can't do that, or yes, well, because we've written it on our, governing documents, we are open to any women across London who want help. But are you really? I think that's the change I want to see next. A world where people can access help and support if they want it and when they want it, and not be turned away or ignored or spoken to in a way that just does not correlate to their own experiences because they come from a different community or they were raised differently or they don't fit a mold, so to speak.
Mm. So it's really a matter of education and closing that hole of stopping the minimizing, the not hearing people properly, and therefore jumping to conclusions that often lead to
Yeah.
the undesired outcome of people not being heard.
Or people falling between the gaps.
Yeah.
We other people, it's an unconscious bias, let's just say we all have.
Yeah.
But the systems and structures that we all live in should be accessible for everybody that lives in it. And instead, we find that people from minority communities fall through the gaps, and they might have reported something or disclosed something, but it is dismissed in a way because not through malice or, nasty intentions, purely because they didn't say it in a way that I would have interpreted that to be a disclosure.
Mm.
And so then they're turned away. Like, it's things like that. So I guess it is more education, but it's also more better policies, which I guess is ironic. I've, gone for a policy role, but we need to look at all the factors that we have, all the systems that we have going on with a sort of wider view, and see how we can better our policies and our systems so that it is accessible for everybody, so people can disclose in any way, shape, or form and still be eligible for help.
Yeah. Yehudis, do you want to give me even more detailed info of that change that you want to see? What do you think needs to happen right now?
People that work in those roles need to look at themselves and their systems and how they behave and their risk assessments and their intake procedures. If your form says one thing but you're not asking it, it's only as good as the questions you're going to ask.
For sure.
Something as really basic as when I first started working with the Met Police, actually also Manchester Police, I said, here's our referral systems, here's the numbers, can you just ping me an email if anyone that is Jewish comes to report so that we can offer support, because we know that someone who is supported with this process has a better likelihood of getting to court and not dropping out of the process and so on. And they said, well, we do have a thing on our form, whether they identify as any, religious group or community affiliations. And I said, right, great, but do you ask them? And most of the time, no, they didn't ask. So how would you fill that in? How would you know that that referral process needs to be done straight away? And then you come to me 6 months later or 9 months later and say, so we had this Jewish victim who has now dropped out of it and doesn't want to proceed. And I said, well, why didn't you engage us at that day dot? Things like that of, the amount of failed cases that should have gone to court, failed with better safeguarding. It's only so much that you can take of saying, I told you so. I don't want to say it. I don't enjoy saying it, but if we look at people as a person instead of judging them by how they might appear or look, or we've just boxed them because they're dressed like a Haredi woman, and say, actually, what do you need? What can we offer you? Can I signpost you? I can refer you to this organization. We can offer you this interpreter. Do you know what I mean? It's just,
yes,
listen to the person, ask the questions, and trust that they know what they need and want.
Yeah. It's almost to me as if we are, sorry. It looks to me as if we fail on the human side. We do not want to see those sides in other humans, and we don't want to look at that suffering or that particular side of, terrible things that humans do to humans, and therefore we look away.
There's definitely an element of that. There's also an element of, here's a vulnerable person who can't articulate themselves properly, so I'll articulate for them because I might know best what they need. It's not bad intentions, but you're essentially perpetuating the harm of not giving them their autonomy.
Yeah, I'm with you. What top tips would you give to women that are working in roles that support minority communities, Yehudis?
So I've partly covered some of them. Just be open. Don't suggest or think you know best because of how an individual presents. They might be dressed differently, or their dress might automatically make them associated with a minority group. It does not mean that they then don't know what their next steps are or what they actually want to gain out of, the engagement process with you. Most times people actually do know what they want. they either want to be heard, they want some medical assistance, they want to go to court. That, you know, people do know they haven't made that call or that judgment to engage. And also that this whole idea of cultural norms should not include things that are harmful to people within that culture. So often I would see that people go to community representatives to say, well, I've got this case, how should I deal with it? But a community representative is often just that, trying to protect and maintain that community representation, the collective group, and not have the best intentions for the individual. So if you are in any of those roles where you are going to engage with someone from a minority group, or they're coming to you for support, or they've been flagged in your system that they need to, you know, an intervention, ask them what they want, help them facilitate an environment in which they could talk to you honestly without perhaps their family members present or community representatives present. And just trust that they know what it is that they want and need, and see what you could do to help them in meeting them there, as opposed to saying they're from that community, I've spoken to their community representative and they, you know, are hard to reach, they never called me back, and that's it.
Yeah, thank you for that. Yehuda, so of all the work that you've done, what are you most proud of?
Oh, that's a really hard one. I don't know if there's like a hierarchy. I am most proud that I've set up the Awareness Week, that I set up a charity that was supporting Jewish victims, and we helped so many people over the years. I'm proud that I guess opened that conversation in my community, shoved it onto the map and agenda of lots of, you know, meetings within the community. Yeah, I guess work-wise, I think I'm quite proud of a lot of what I've done. You know, continue to do.
Yeah, Yehuda's feeling comfortable and doing the uncomfortable. I think that's really an incredible strength. Yehuda, so what are your plans and goals for the next years?
Oh, I don't know. It's quite hard to know for certain. I knew I wanted to step out of sort of CEO role because it was a massive workload for me. I'm enjoying my role at the moment, and I quite like the balance of doing a master's that's still in sexual violence, but then not working necessarily directly in sexual violence. So it's a bit of a better balance at the moment. And then I don't know, we'll see. I think I'd like to go back into the sexual violence sector, but possibly more from a policy, strategy, prevention perspective, as opposed to frontline working with people that have experienced the most horrific harm. I think there's a cap, sadly. And at the moment, I've reached my limit for that, but we'll see as time goes on.
Yeah. Yehuda, so have you had any role models who inspired or motivated you to keep going, to bring about change in what you had to experience and to make it different for other people?
I'd like, actually, I mean, does this sound quite depressing? I'm going to say no. Role models growing up were people that were aspirational in the way they fit within the community structure. People that do the things that I did were not role models. They were spoken about in really negative, punishable, derogatory ways. So it's interesting, the topic of role models. I don't know. I think my first encounter with even the names for my experiences of sexual abuse was through an Oprah show. I guess I could say, I wouldn't say she was a role model for me, but the fact that she can have discussions of sexual abuse and sexual assault on TV, sitting opposite someone who's, you know, experienced that and trying to vocalize it. I think that's quite inspirational. So I guess that goes to Oprah. But I guess in terms of role models, no, I guess I'm just my own role model.
Definitely. Yehudis, I'm so thankful to Mandy Sangira who put me in touch with you and connected us. And I'm so thankful for you telling your story that I think is such an important story to be heard for others to have that role model that they're missing in their community potentially. So thank you so much for talking to me today.
Pleasure. Thank you for having me.